Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the absolute silence of the cosmic ocean, a place where the sun burns without warmth, and the stars do not twinkle, but stare with a cold, unblinking light. We are on the verge of a new era. You have likely heard of Artemis II, NASA's triumphant plan to send humans back around the moon. It is a beautiful dream, a return to our closest celestial neighbor. But what comes next? What hides in the blueprints of Artemis III, Artemis IV, and beyond? The truth is, the plan after Artemis II has scientists terrified, not with the panic of a sudden disaster, but with the profound, chilling awe of facing the infinite. The challenges that await us in the deep, quiet dark are so monumental, so deeply hostile to human life, that they keep the brightest minds awake at night. Tonight, we will drift through the vacuum. We will explore the majestic, terrifying reality of our permanent return to the moon. Breathe deeply. Let go of the earthly noise around you. We are leaving the atmosphere. We are stepping into the profound unknown. To understand the sheer scale of this quiet terror, we must first look back at where we have been. The Apollo missions were a sprint, a breathtaking, heart-pounding dash to touch the lunar dust and return safely home before the harsh reality of space could claim our astronauts. They were monumental, but they were brief. Artemis is fundamentally different. The plan after Artemis II is not a sprint. It is the establishment of a permanent foothold in a world that actively rejects us. We are not just visiting the moon, we are moving into its orbit, settling in its darkest craters, and learning to survive in an environment devoid of air, warmth, or the protective shield of our home planet. The terror scientists feel is the realization that we are leaving the cradle. Earth's magnetic field and thick atmosphere have nurtured us, shielded us from the violent radiation and chaotic debris of the solar system. Beyond Artemis II, we strip away that armor. We step naked into the cosmic wilderness, armed only with the fragile shells of our spacecraft and the delicate threads of our ingenuity. This transition from visitors to inhabitants changes everything. It turns minor technical glitches into existential threats. It transforms the beautiful night sky into a vast, unyielding ocean of danger. But what lies beyond the safety of a simple flyby? The terrifying leap from Artemis II to Artemis III marks a profound shift in our relationship with the cosmos. We are no longer just looking through the window, we are stepping out into the void. Imagine the sheer audacity of this plan. We are aiming for the lunar South Pole, a region completely unlike the smooth equatorial plains visited by Apollo. This is a landscape of extremes where the sun hovers low on the horizon, casting shadows that stretch for miles, plunging entire valleys into an eternal, freezing darkness. A vivid example of this challenge is the descent itself. Imagine trying to land a skyscraper on a treacherous, uneven mountain ridge, guided only by sensors that must interpret a landscape completely devoid of atmospheric perspective. Many believe the myth that the moon is just a dormant, peaceful rock. The reality is that it is a dynamic, challenging environment where the lighting conditions alone can deceive the human eye and confound the most advanced computers. This leap requires precision that defies imagination. The soothing thought here is that humanity is capable of such profound mathematics. We are calculating the dance of gravity to land gently in a place of sublime, terrifying beauty. Let us drift closer to the surface. The target for our new pioneers is the lunar South Pole. Why does this specific location cause such anxiety among planetary scientists? It is because the South Pole is a realm of eternal twilight and abyssal darkness. Here, there are craters whose floors have not felt the warmth of the sun for billions of years. Imagine standing on the rim of such a crater. One foot is bathed in blinding, unfiltered solar radiation, while the other is perched above a void so cold it approaches absolute zero. A vivid illustration of this is the concept of a trap. These permanently shadowed regions are cold traps, holding on to ancient ice, but they are also traps for heat. If an astronaut steps into the shadow, the temperature drop is instantaneous and violently extreme. We must debunk the myth that spacesuits can easily handle any temperature. The truth is, engineering a suit that can bend, flex, and keep a human alive while standing in temperatures colder than Pluto is a monumental, terrifying task. The materials become brittle. The life support systems must work flawlessly against the chilling grip of the dark. The terror is in the margins of error. In this quiet, frozen world, there is absolutely no room for a mistake. As we descend, we must confront the very ground we intend to walk upon. The terrain of the lunar South Pole is jagged, violent, and uneroded. On Earth, wind and water soften the landscape over time, creating smooth stones and rolling hills. On the Moon, the landscape is shaped only by the violent kinetic impacts of meteors. Imagine a world entirely composed of shattered glass. Every rock, every cliff face is sharp, undisturbed by any gentle breeze. A vivid example is the challenge of simply walking. An astronaut must navigate a field of microscopic razor blades. There is a common myth that the Moon's low gravity makes movement effortless, like a slow-motion dance. In reality, the lack of gravity combined with this treacherous terrain makes movement clumsy, exhausting, and highly dangerous. A tear in a suit from a jagged rock is a silent, immediate catastrophe. The terror scientists feel is the unpredictability of this terrain. Rovers could easily become trapped in hidden crevices filled with deceptive, powdery dust. The environment is pristine, ancient, and entirely unforgiving. Yet there is a strange peace in knowing that when we leave a footprint there, it will remain undisturbed for millions of years, a silent testament to our terrifying courage. Now let us look closer at that dust, the lunar regolith. This is perhaps one of the most quietly terrifying aspects of the permanent lunar base plan. To the naked eye, it looks like soft, grey powder, but under a microscope it reveals its true, malicious nature. Imagine inhaling ground-up fiberglass. That is the essence of lunar dust. Because there is no wind or water to smooth its edges, each particle is jagged, sharp, and highly abrasive. A vivid illustration of this danger is the degradation of the Apollo spacesuits. After just a few days, the dust was already wearing away layers of Kevlar, clogging seals and degrading equipment. Now, imagine living with this dust for months or years. We must dispel the myth that we can simply brush this dust off before entering a habitat. Lunar dust is electrostatically charged by solar radiation. It clings aggressively to everything. It finds its way into airlocks, life support systems, and the lungs of astronauts. The terror is microscopic. Scientists fear a condition akin to silicosis, a slow, silent suffocation caused by the very world we are trying to inhabit. Finding a way to live harmoniously with this clinging, abrasive environment is a puzzle that keeps engineers up at night. But the surface is only half of the terrifying equation. To sustain a presence on the Moon, NASA's plan relies on the Gateway. This is a space station entirely unlike the International Space Station. The Gateway will not orbit in the comforting low Earth orbit where rescue is just hours away. It will be placed in a highly elliptical lunar orbit. Imagine a tiny, silver outpost balancing on a knife's edge of gravity. A vivid example of this orbital dance is a pendulum swinging wildly. The Gateway will swoop close to the Moon's North Pole and then swing tens of thousands of miles away over the South Pole. It is a precarious, lonely orbit. A prevalent myth is that once in orbit, a station simply floats peacefully forever. The reality of the Gateway's orbit requires constant, meticulous management to prevent it from drifting off into the void or crashing into the lunar surface. The terror here is the isolation. When the Gateway is at the furthest point in its orbit, it is incredibly far from both the Earth and the lunar surface. It hangs in the deep dark, a fragile metal bubble protecting soft human lives from the immense, crushing emptiness of deep space. The quiet hum of its engines is the only thing standing between the crew and eternity. Let us linger on the Gateway for a moment longer. The psychological weight of this outpost is profound. When astronauts are aboard the ISS, they can look down and see the vibrant blue and green of Earth, a massive, comforting presence filling their windows. On the gateway, Earth will be nothing more than a distant, fragile blue marble suspended in an infinite sea of black. Imagine the profound sense of detachment. A vivid illustration of this is the feeling of floating in the middle of a dark, boundless ocean at night, with only a tiny, distant lighthouse to remind you of home. We often hold on to the myth that astronauts are immune to fear or loneliness because of their intense training, but scientists are deeply terrified of the psychological impact of deep space isolation. The overwhelming silence, the vast distances, the constant low-level anxiety of relying entirely on machines for your next breath. How will the human mind cope when it is severed from the visual anchor of its home world? This is a journey not just into the physical vacuum, but into the depths of human consciousness. The isolation is a heavy blanket, and the mind must find a way to stay anchored when the body is drifting hundreds of thousands of miles from everything it has ever known. Beyond the psychological isolation lies a far more invisible, silent terror: radiation. Once we leave the protective embrace of Earth's magnetosphere, we enter a shooting gallery. The space between the Earth and the Moon is flooded with dangerous particles. Imagine standing in a slow, continuous rain of microscopic bullets. A vivid example of this threat is the flashes of light that Apollo astronauts reported seeing even when their eyes were closed. These were cosmic rays physically passing through their optic nerves. There is a common myth that the metallic hull of a spaceship provides perfect safety from all radiation. The chilling truth is that while shielding can block some radiation, it can also make certain types worse. When a high-energy particle strikes a metal hull, it can shatter into secondary radiation, creating a shower of particles inside the cabin. Scientists are terrified of the long-term biological effects of this constant bombardment. It damages DNA, accelerates aging, and significantly increases the risk of severe illness. As we plan to stay for months rather than days, managing this invisible storm becomes a matter of life and death. The astronauts will be sailing a sea of energy, relying on precise weather forecasts from the sun to know when to hide deep within the protective core of their ship. Speaking of the sun, it is the source of our next immense challenge: solar particle events or solar flares. Our sun is a dynamic, raging fusion reactor, and occasionally it lashes out. Imagine a sudden, violent storm erupting on a calm ocean, but instead of water, it throws lethal doses of radiation across the solar system at nearly the speed of light. A vivid illustration of this terror is a ticking clock. If a massive solar flare erupts while astronauts are exploring the lunar surface, they may have only minutes to find shelter before receiving a lethal dose of radiation. We must debunk the myth that space weather is predictable and calm. The truth is, it is chaotic and fiercely sudden. The sun can go from a quiet companion to a deadly adversary without warning. The terror for mission controllers is the agonizing delay in communication and the sheer vulnerability of humans standing on a rock with no atmosphere. Building safe havens both on the gateway and on the lunar surface that can withstand these cosmic tsunamis is one of the most critical and frightening aspects of the Artemis plan. The sun gives life to Earth, but in the deep dark, it is a formidable, unpredictable beast. While the sun presents acute, sudden dangers, there is another type of radiation that represents an ancient, constant threat: galactic, cosmic rays. These are not from our sun. They are highly energetic particles hurled across the universe by exploding stars and supermassive black holes billions of years ago. Imagine a ghost passing through solid walls. These particles travel at incredible speeds and carry so much energy that they pass straight through almost any conventional shielding we can build. A vivid example is trying to stop a speeding bullet with a piece of paper. Traditional spacecraft hulls offer very little defense against a heavy cosmic ray. People often hold the myth that space is just an empty vacuum. But the reality is that the vacuum is alive with these ancient, invisible messengers of destruction. The scientific terror stems from the fact that we currently do not have a lightweight, practical way to fully block them. Long-term exposure during a permanent lunar mission means accepting a slow accumulation of cellular damage. Every day spent in deep space is a day bathed in the remnants of dead stars. It is a haunting thought to be slowly worn down by the echoes of cosmic history. Let us transition from the invisible threats outside to the subtle changes happening inside the human body. The terrifying reality of microgravity. When we plan to stay in space for extended periods, the very absence of weight becomes an adversary. Imagine your body slowly forgetting how to exist. Without the constant pull of Earth's gravity, bones begin to dissolve and muscles waste away. A vivid illustration of this is the recovery process of astronauts returning from the ISS. They often have to be carried because their bodies can no longer support their own weight. A persistent myth is that floating in zero gravity is purely a relaxing, effortless experience. While it may feel serene, the truth is that it is fundamentally unnatural for a biological organism evolved under a constant 1G. The heart becomes weaker because it doesn't have to pump against gravity. Fluids shift upwards, causing pressure in the head and changes to vision. Scientists are deeply concerned about the long-term degradation of the human form on the Gateway and the Moon's surface, which only has 1/6 of Earth's gravity. We are designing exercise machines and protocols, but the terror remains. Are we capable of living long-term in an environment our bodies were never designed for? As we look deeper into the logistics of lunar habitation, we encounter the terrifying prospect of the lunar night. Due to the Moon's rotation, a single night lasts for 14 Earth days. Imagine an endless, freezing darkness that lasts for 2 entire weeks. The sun vanishes and the temperature plummets to levels that can shatter metal. A vivid example of this challenge is trying to keep a campfire burning through a monstrous blizzard. The habitat, the rovers, the life support systems, everything must rely on stored energy for 14 days of absolute, biting cold. We often believe the myth that solar panels provide a constant, reliable source of energy in space, but during the lunar night, solar panels are entirely useless. The terror here is the reliance on battery technology and potentially nuclear power sources to simply keep the astronauts from freezing to death. If the power systems fail on day 3 of a 14-day night, there is no hope of rescue, no sun to warm them. The darkness becomes a tangible, physical enemy. Surviving the lunar night is a masterclass in engineering, a terrifying test of our ability to hoard warmth and light against the vast, crushing cold of the void. The sheer distance of the Artemis missions introduces another layer of quiet terror. We are accustomed to the International Space Station, which sits just a few hundred miles above our heads. A trip to the ISS takes a matter of hours. If a critical emergency occurs, astronauts can evacuate and be back on Earth within the same day. But the Moon is roughly 240,000 miles away. Imagine being on a ship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, days away from any port, and suddenly the hull breaches. A vivid illustration is the Apollo 13 crisis, a harrowing journey of survival over vast distances. The myth is that modern technology has made space travel quick and effortless. The terrifying reality of orbital mechanics is that you cannot simply turn around and fly home whenever you want. Returning from the Moon takes days. If a medical emergency arises or a critical life support system fails, the astronauts are entirely on their own. The psychological weight of this distance is immense. The Earth is no longer a safety net. It is merely a destination, incredibly far away, across a dark and unforgiving ocean. The margin for error vanishes when the journey home takes 250,000 miles. Connected to this vast distance is the chilling reality of communication delay. When we talk to astronauts in low Earth orbit, the conversation is nearly instantaneous. But as we move out to the lunar orbit and the Gateway, physics begins to interfere. Radio waves take time to travel. Imagine trying to have a vital, life-saving conversation where every sentence you speak is met with a lingering, echoing silence before a response comes. A vivid example is a heart-stopping moment during a delicate operation. If an astronaut on the lunar surface asks mission control a question, it takes over a second for the signal to reach Earth and another second for the reply to return. To the average person, 2 or 3 seconds seems trivial. The myth is that communication in space is like making a long-distance phone call. The truth is that in a high-pressure emergency, a 3-second delay is an eternity. It is the terrifying gap between life and death. The astronauts must become increasingly autonomous. They cannot rely on real-time guidance from the brilliant minds in Houston. They are alone with their training, their machines, and the quiet delay of the void. The silence on the radio is a constant reminder of their isolation. To survive in this remote environment, NASA must rely on a concept that terrifies engineers: in situ resource utilization, or ISRU. This simply means living off the land. We cannot bring everything we need from Earth. It is too heavy and too expensive. We must mine the moon. Imagine arriving in an absolute desert and having to extract the very air you breathe from the rocks. A vivid illustration of this is trying to wring out a dry sponge. The plan is to harvest water ice trapped in the permanently shadowed craters of the lunar South Pole. We often harbor the myth that this ice is like a frozen lake, ready to be chipped away and melted. The terrifying reality is that this ice is deeply mixed with abrasive, toxic lunar regolith. It is as hard as concrete and buried in absolute darkness. The machinery required to dig, crush, heat, and purify this frozen dirt in a vacuum at near absolute zero has never been built on this scale. The terror is that the entire future of deep space exploration hinges on this unproven technology. If we cannot extract water to drink, to make oxygen to breathe, and to synthesize rocket fuel, the permanent base fails. We are betting our future on the ability to perform heavy industrial mining in the most hostile environment imaginable. Let us delve deeper into the mechanics of this extraterrestrial alchemy. The process of extracting water from lunar regolith is not a simple matter of heating dirt. Imagine trying to perform complex chemistry inside a vacuum chamber while wearing thick, clumsy gloves. A vivid example of the challenge is the sublimation process. In a vacuum, ice does not melt into liquid water. It sublimates, turning directly from a solid into a gas. Capturing this gas before it dissipates into the void is a terrifyingly delicate operation. There is a myth that space mining will quickly yield vast flowing resources. The truth is, it will be a slow, agonizing process of processing tons of toxic soil just to extract a few precious drops of water. Furthermore, the machinery itself is at risk. How do you lubricate gears when oil instantly boils away in a vacuum? How do you prevent the abrasive lunar dust from destroying the drills and seals? Engineers are terrified by the mechanical failures that are almost guaranteed to happen. A broken drill on Earth is an inconvenience. A broken drill on the moon, when that drill is the only source of drinking water and breathable air, is a death sentence. The quiet terror lies in the fragility of our machines against the brutal reality of lunar physics. To perform these tasks, humans must leave the safety of their habitats. But this brings us to the terrifying reality of the new space suits, the XEMU. A spacesuit is not merely clothing, it is a human-shaped spacecraft. It must be a perfectly sealed, climate-controlled, pressurized vessel that moves. Imagine wearing a thick balloon that is constantly trying to expand and stiffen in a vacuum. A vivid illustration of this challenge is trying to play a piano while wearing heavy winter gloves. The physical exertion required simply to bend an arm or squeeze a tool against the pressure of the suit is exhausting. We often believe the myth that astronauts float gracefully and effortlessly in their suits. The reality is that spacewalks are grueling marathons of physical endurance. The terror for scientists is the sheer complexity of these suits. They are woven with intricate life support systems, cooling garments, and carbon dioxide scrubbers. Every zipper, every seal, every valve is a single point of failure. A microscopic leak, a jammed hinge, or a failed cooling pump can quickly become fatal. The astronauts are stepping into a hostile universe protected only by a few layers of high-tech fabric. The void is always waiting just millimeters away, silent and deadly. While the astronauts work in these fragile suits, they face a silent, invisible threat zipping through the darkness. micrometeoroids. These are tiny flecks of rock and dust left over from the birth of the solar system, traveling at unimaginable speeds. Imagine a grain of sand traveling 10 times faster than a rifle bullet. A vivid example of this terror is the damage found on the Space Shuttle windows and the ISS solar panels, tiny, spider-webbed craters caused by impacts from specks of paint or dust. There is a common myth that space is a pristine, empty void. In reality, it is a high-speed shooting gallery. Because the moon has no atmosphere to burn up these incoming projectiles, they strike the surface with their full, devastating kinetic energy. Scientists are terrified of a micrometeoroid impact puncturing a spacesuit during a lunar excursion. It is an entirely unpredictable event. There is no radar warning for a grain of sand. The habitats and the gateway must be wrapped in heavy, multi-layered shielding like Whipple shields to shatter and absorb these impacts. The quiet, soothing thought is knowing the incredible ingenuity of human engineering, designing armor against the invisible, silent rain of the cosmos. As we contemplate the physical dangers, we must return to the profound psychological dread known as the Earth out of view phenomenon. This goes beyond simple isolation. For millions of years of human evolution, the sky, the horizon, and the Earth beneath our feet have been our constants. Imagine walking into a room where up, down, left, and right have lost all meaning, and the door behind you vanishes. A vivid illustration is sensory deprivation. While astronauts on the ISS see the Earth constantly passing below, those on the gateway or exploring the far side of the moon will experience periods where Earth is entirely hidden from sight. A myth we tell ourselves is that training can completely erase primal human fears. The reality that terrifies psychologists is the potential for profound existential dread. When the blue marble disappears, the astronaut is left entirely alone in a terrifyingly vast, indifferent universe. The visual tether to humanity is severed. How does the mind process, being the furthest any human has ever been from home, entirely surrounded by the sterile, black void? Managing this deep, psychological isolation is just as critical as managing the oxygen supply. It is the challenge of keeping the human spirit intact in the face of the infinite. This profound isolation amplifies the terror of medical emergencies. In deep space, an astronaut cannot simply call an ambulance. Imagine suffering a burst appendix or a severe compound fracture in a place where the nearest hospital is 250,000 miles away, and the journey back takes days of high G acceleration. A vivid example of this nightmare is the need to perform surgery in a microgravity environment. Blood does not pool, it floats in tiny, hazardous spheres. Internal organs shift uncontrollably. The myth is that astronauts are perfectly healthy and immune to sudden illness. The reality is that the human body is unpredictable, and the stress of spaceflight only exacerbates potential issues. Scientists are terrified because the crew must be their own surgeons, their own pharmacists, and their own first responders. The habitats must be equipped with advanced, automated medical technology, perhaps even AI-assisted surgical robotics. But even with the best technology, the cold truth remains. A serious medical crisis in deep space is a solitary, desperate fight for life against overwhelming odds. The margin of safety is razor-thin, suspended in the quiet darkness. We must also consider the microbiome of the spacecraft itself. Wherever humans go, our microscopic companions go with us. The gateway and the lunar habitats will become isolated, enclosed ecosystems. Imagine sealing yourself in a submarine for months without ever taking in fresh air. A vivid illustration of this challenge is the way bacteria behave on the ISS. In microgravity, some strains mutate, become more virulent, and develop resistance to antibiotics faster than they do on Earth. A persistent myth is that spacecraft environments are sterile and pristine. The terrifying reality is that they are living, breathing incubators. The moisture from human breath, the shedding of skin cells, the closed-loop water recycling systems all create a breeding ground for fungi and bacteria. Scientists fear an outbreak of a mutated pathogen within the confined, heavily recirculated air of the gateway. An infection that would be easily treated on Earth could become a rapid, devastating plague in deep space. Maintaining the delicate balance of this artificial microbiome requires constant vigilance. It is a quiet, microscopic war fought in the shadows of the spacecraft, where a single mutated spore could threaten the entire mission. The challenges of the Moon are truly immense, but they are just the prologue. The ultimate reason the Artemis plan terrifies scientists is because the Moon is merely a stepping stone. The true destination is Mars. Imagine using the harshest, most unforgiving desert on Earth just to practice for a journey to an even more distant, desolate wasteland. A vivid example is the communication delay. If the few seconds of delay to the Moon is stressful, the 20-minute one-way delay to Mars is a psychological nightmare. We often hold the myth that once we conquer the Moon, Mars will be easy. The reality is that the leap from the Moon to Mars is exponentially more terrifying than the leap from Earth to the Moon. The Artemis missions are the testing ground. Every failure, every terrifying close call, every mechanical breakdown on the lunar surface is a crucial lesson. If a system fails on the Moon, there is a slim, desperate chance of rescue or return. If that same system fails halfway to Mars, there is absolutely no hope. Scientists look at Artemis not just as a lunar mission, but as the great filter. We must survive the quiet terror of the Moon to prove we are worthy of surviving the deeper, darker abyss that lies beyond. Let us examine the precarious nature of the orbit chosen for the gateway. The Near Rectilinear Halo Orbit, or NRHO. This is not a simple, circular path around the Moon's equator. It is a highly elongated, complex dance perfectly balanced between the gravitational pull of the Earth and the Moon. Imagine spinning a coin perfectly on its edge on the deck of a moving ship. A vivid illustration of this is balancing a broom on the tip of your finger while walking forward. It is elegantly efficient, requiring very little fuel to maintain, but it is deeply counterintuitive. A common myth in spaceflight is that orbits are permanent, fixed tracks. The terrifying reality of the NRHO is that it is a dynamically unstable region of space. The gateway is constantly falling towards the Moon and being pulled back by the Earth. It requires absolute pinpoint precision in mathematics to maintain. A slight miscalculation, a failure in the station's thrusters, and the delicate balance is lost. The station could crash into the lunar surface or be flung wildly out into deep space. The terror here is the reliance on flawless orbital mechanics. The crew will sleep knowing their home is performing a perpetual, perilous balancing act in the dark. As we strive to make this delicate balancing act permanent, we must create artificial biospheres. On Earth, the biosphere is massive, self-correcting, and deeply resilient. On the Moon, our biosphere will be a fragile, engineered bubble. Imagine trying to recreate the entire complexity of a forest ecosystem inside a glass jar. A vivid example of this terrifying fragility is the carbon dioxide scrubbing systems. On Earth, billions of trees breathe in our waste. In space, complex chemical reactions or carefully cultivated algae must perform this task perfectly without interruption. There is a myth that advanced technology can easily replicate nature's perfection. The truth is that artificial life support is notoriously finicky. If a pump fails or a chemical filter becomes saturated, the air inside the habitat slowly turns toxic. The terror is that the astronauts are living inside a machine that must constantly fight the natural state of the universe around it, which is a lifeless vacuum. The hum of the life support fans is the heartbeat of the mission. If that hum stops, the absolute silence of the void rushes in. It is a constant, terrifying battle against entropy. To truly live off the land, we must learn to grow food in this dead environment. Agriculture in space is a monumental, terrifying challenge. Imagine trying to plant a garden in crushed, irradiated glass. A vivid illustration is the desperate attempt to coax a single green shoot from soil that contains absolutely no organic matter, no microbes, and no history of life. We often believe the myth that with enough water and light, seeds will grow anywhere. The harsh reality is that lunar regolith is toxic to plants. It contains heavy metals and lacks the essential nutrients found in Earth soil. Scientists are terrified by the prospect of relying on extraterrestrial agriculture. We must engineer specialized hydroponic systems or heavily modify the regolith, all while battling the lack of gravity, which confuses the roots of the plants. The lighting must be artificially generated during the long lunar night. If a crop fails on Earth, you buy food from a store. If a crop fails on the lunar base, starvation slowly sets in. The profound, quiet terror is trying to force the spark of life into a world that has been utterly dead for billions of years. The power required to sustain this fragile bubble of life brings us to another immense challenge. How do we generate massive amounts of power in the dark? We touched on the lunar night, but the scale of the power requirement is staggering. Imagine trying to power a small city using only equipment you can carry in a backpack. A vivid example is the shift toward nuclear fission reactors for the lunar surface. Solar panels are simply not enough for a permanent industrial base. The myth is that solar energy is the ultimate, endless solution for space. The terrifying reality is that to survive the 14-day night and power the mining equipment, NASA must deploy small, autonomous nuclear reactors on the Moon. This introduces a new layer of anxiety. Launching nuclear material from Earth, landing it safely on the Moon, and operating a reactor in a harsh, dusty vacuum is incredibly risky. The terror is a malfunction. A nuclear incident on Earth is devastating. A nuclear incident on a lunar base would permanently contaminate the only habitable zone we have managed to create. It is a necessary gamble, trading the terror of freezing in the dark for the terror of harnessing atomic fire in the void. As we bring our machines, our bodies, and our atomic fire to the Moon, we face the ethical and scientific terror of forward contamination. This is the fear of bringing Earth life to a pristine, alien environment. Imagine walking across a perfectly smooth field of fresh snow with muddy boots. A vivid illustration of this is the extremophile bacteria on Earth, like tardigrades or certain spores, that can survive the vacuum of space for years. We hold a myth that the harshness of space instantly sterilizes everything. The reality is that microbes are incredibly resilient. Scientists are terrified that as we drill into the ancient ice of the lunar South Pole, we will contaminate it with bacteria from our suits and rovers. Why is this terrifying? Because if we ever want to search for signs of ancient life in the solar system, we must ensure we are not just finding our own contamination. By establishing a permanent, messy human presence on the Moon, we risk destroying a pristine scientific record that has existed for 4 billion years. The terror is that our mere presence destroys the very mysteries we are trying to study. We are the muddy boots. Conversely, there is the historic fear of back contamination, bringing something terrifying back to Earth. While the scientific consensus is that the Moon is sterile, the protocols remain. Imagine opening a sealed box that has been buried in the desert for an eternity. You cannot be absolutely certain what breathes inside. A vivid example is the strict quarantine the Apollo 11 astronauts underwent upon returning, locked in an Airstream trailer. The myth today is that we have completely discarded the fear of lunar pathogens. While we do not expect lunar viruses, the reality of deep space missions means we will eventually return samples from Mars or other bodies. The Artemis missions are the practice ground for planetary protection. The terror is not necessarily a lunar plague, but the realization that our procedures must be absolutely flawless before we attempt to bring back Martian soil. If we fail to secure a sample from the Moon due to dust degradation on the seals, it proves we are not ready for Mars. The quiet dread is that the universe is vast and our understanding of biology is limited. We must treat the void with the utmost respect, isolating our world from the unknowns of the dark. Beneath the high-minded science and the existential dread lies the cold, terrifying math of economics and logistics. Surviving in space is the most expensive, unforgiving logistical puzzle ever conceived. Imagine trying to build a house by mailing individual bricks across the ocean at $1 million apiece. A vivid illustration of this is the cost per kilogram of launching material into deep space. Every drop of water, every bolt, every bandage must be meticulously calculated. We often succumb to the myth that once a space program is funded, the path is clear. The terrifying reality is that a permanent lunar base hangs by a thread of continuous, massive funding and flawless supply chains. If a resupply rocket explodes on the pad on Earth, the astronauts on the Moon are put on a terrifying countdown. There is no backup store. The terror scientists and mission planners feel is the fragility of this logistical umbilical cord. A political shift, an economic downturn, or a single catastrophic launch failure could leave the lunar inhabitants stranded, slowly exhausting their supplies. The void is not just physically hostile, it is economically merciless. Survival is least, and the rent is astronomical. Let us pause and listen. Let us consider the acoustic environment of deep space exploration. It is a paradox of deafening noise and absolute silence. Inside the spacesuit and the habitat, there is a constant mechanical roar. Imagine sleeping next to a running jet engine. The fans, the pumps, the air scrubbers, they must run constantly. A vivid example is the profound psychological fatigue astronauts experience from the relentless hum of life support. The myth is that space is a quiet, peaceful place to work. The terrifying reality is that inside the ship, it is loud, claustrophobic, and vibrating. But just inches away, on the other side of the glass, exists the most profound, absolute silence imaginable. A vacuum carries no sound waves, a mountain could shatter on the Moon, and you would hear absolutely nothing. The terror is the juxtaposition. The loud, desperate mechanical noise of survival inside, and the vast, indifferent, deadly silence outside. Psychologists fear the long-term effects of this acoustic isolation. The astronauts are trapped in a noisy bubble, profoundly aware that the silence outside is waiting to consume them if a single machine fails. Finally, we must recognize the generational shift that Artemis represents. This is not a mission for a single decade. The plan after Artemis II is a multi-generational commitment to living in the dark. Imagine starting to build a cathedral knowing that only your great-grandchildren will see it finished. A vivid illustration of this is the passing of knowledge. The engineers designing the gateway today will likely be retired before its final modules are attached. We often hold the myth that space exploration is a series of isolated, triumphant events. The terrifying yet beautiful reality is that it is a slow, methodical, endless march into the unknown. The terror scientists feel is the burden of laying a flawless foundation. If we make a fundamental error in the architecture of our lunar architecture now, it will cascade into the Martian missions decades later. We are writing the rulebook for humanity's survival among the stars, and we are doing it in the dark, surrounded by lethal radiation, toxic dust, and absolute silence. It is a staggering responsibility. We are no longer just looking at the sky, we are stepping into it, accepting the terror, and choosing to build our future in the infinite quiet. As we slowly pull back from the rugged shadowed craters of the lunar South Pole, past the delicate, precarious orbit of the Gateway, and drift back toward the warm, blue glow of Earth, the true scale of our ambition becomes clear. NASA's plan after Artemis II terrifies scientists not because they lack courage, but because they fully comprehend the sheer magnitude of the universe's hostility. The deep space radiation, the abrasive dust, the crushing isolation, and the absolute silence of the void are formidable adversaries. Yet, it is within this terror that humanity finds its greatest profound beauty. We are fragile creatures of water and bone, daring to build a home in an infinite ocean of deadly cosmic energy. We accept the sublime terror because the alternative, staying forever tethered to our cradle, is simply not in our nature. Thank you for drifting through the darkness with us today. If this journey into the quiet abyss stirred something within you, please subscribe and leave a like. Now gaze up at the night sky and ponder, as we take this terrifying leap into the permanent dark, What do you think is the single most vital trait humanity needs to survive the stars? Let us know in the comments. Hit us